Hello, and welcome back to the all-you-can-eat $5 Superman buffet. I think that I will be taking this video to just talk about the Supergirl TV show, which is on the longer side. It is 6 seasons and CW-length seasons, so in the early 20s for in terms of episodes for each seasons. It is the second of 3 CW shows on here, the first having been Smallville. I I should have mentioned before that the CW has had a monopoly on TV since Smallville, which has been largely to the good. It hasn't had as far as the overall quality according to these tier lists, at least in like terms of live action in the last what 40 years. It hasn't had much of an impact in terms of tiers, but it hasn't hurt it for sure. This one is different though, since it's the only one that's beholden to a larger universe outside the context of the one show. So this is Smallville was on its own. The next show is going to be on its own, but Supergirl is wrapped into dubbed the Arrowverse. So starting with Arrow, then the Flash, and then Supergirl, and what would later include Black Lightning and Legends of Tomorrow, and other shows after that. So in this show, they decided to break the mold of what makes for a Superman TV show. We're not dealing with the Daily Planet family, but it's a different family. There's a journalism angle. Kara Zor-El turned Kara Danvers, which is I don't know if she was ever called Kara Danvers in the comics, but she was called Linda Danvers as one iteration, so they might have just done a portmanteau there. But she is like Clark in that she goes to media, not Daily Planet, but Catco worldwide, and has an alter ego there. But that's not where the family is. The family part of it is there, but it gets cobbled together from her adoptive sister, who's Alex Danvers, and she works with the DEO, the Department of Extra Normal or Extraterrestrial Operations, I believe. And then with the Daily Planet. So it comes from all places, and it really does have the whole air of a family building over time, which I really, really like. Supergirl is played by Melissa Benoist, and she's sunny, she's hopeful. This is something, her performance is not something we've gotten in live action, honestly, since George Reeves, in terms of just like unapologetic sunniness. I would not put Christopher Reeve fully in that camp. He was more restrained, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but just in terms of the type of performance. Tom Welling, too angsty. He was too young, too angsty. And just to get it out of the way, yes, she is in this as a Superman property. She is in this conversation because that's her role in this property. She's the title character. So I am going to be comparing her to Supermen. Even though to her detriment, because she's the only one here, I'm going to be saying Superman is sort of a catch-all a lot of the time. So, next major character, at least starting off, is Jimmy Olsen, here called James Olsen, played by McCod Brooks. I know I do so much comparison here in these videos, but I straight up refuse to compare him to other Jimmy Olsens. He is just a fundamentally different character, even if it is just because it's later in his life, because he's working at this Catco place, but it's clear that he was previously working with the Daily Planet. He already has his relationship with Superman. So, yeah. He kind of acts as the Lois Lane of the early show in terms of being a love interest and actually being at the planet. Sort of. Kind of, sort of. Especially since that's not how his role remains throughout the entire run. Let's see. David Harewood plays the head of the DEO. His name is Hank Henshaw, but that's a red herring. They call him Hank Henshaw, and they give him these glowing red eyes, and we're like, okay, what's going on here? Cyborg Superman. But no, it's John Jones. It's actually John Jones. It turns out he had occasion to take Henshaw's body, and he's just like happy with it. So it's good to give red herrings like this in an adaptation. It's going to start to become a little more common. There are several in the next CW show as well. And then the other one to mention early on is Kate McGrath, who plays Lena Luthor, who is a Lex stand-in, a complicated version of the character a la Rosenbaum for most of the show. Then they go a different direction with her, making her primarily good, but flirting with evil in a way that makes sense. And unlike Lex and particularly Lionel from Smallville, they don't lose track of it. And then they ultimately give her a good ending, which I'm here for. In terms of like a contained show, I'm totally here for that. And then there are some other major actor names that I'll get into as I go further into the show. But just to start out here, some cameos. Helen Slater, Supergirl 84, plays Mrs. Danvers, so the Earth Mom. Erica Durance is not at first playing the Kryptonian mom, but she's the second actress to play her. Dean Cain plays the Earth Daddy, who is not around very often, but when he's there, that's who he plays him. And then Terry Hatcher plays not a Kryptonian, like an alien mom that's a villain in the. And it's funny because I watched. I should have said this earlier. I watched Supergirl. The first two seasons before I did all of this, and so I knew Terry Hatcher as this character first before I ever got to her as Lois. And I did not. It was long enough that I did not really make the connection until I, looked up her actress's name much later when doing research for this show. So, before I get into, there are a couple of overall series things I want to address, particularly with the CW in general, not with Smallville, but with, getting, kind of actually starting with this show. And that's addressing the reputation of the CW as woke. And in terms of, I will say that it's more heavy-handed than other Superman properties, it's true. But that doesn't mean I'm not convinced it's out of nowhere. And it's definitely not antithetical to the Superman archetype. Like, there is an element of activism to him in a broad sense, in at least a broad sense of the word. So in a way, we're just talking about a modern context for what we've seen ascribed to Superman throughout his entire run, even if it's, again, to a greater extent than it's been before. And this includes gender stuff, race stuff, other, vague, like, ascribe left type ideology here. But I would not include the aliens are used as an immigrant allegory. And I would not include that in the over-the-top umbrella, because that's always been Superman's thing. That's like the whole idea behind him. So I will not hear much criticism of that. And then I also have to talk about an element of the show that wasn't present, or at least as present, in Smallville. I started to notice a pattern of how the stories are structured, and this is across the Arrowverse, across 2010's era CW, superhero CW shows. What they'll do is they'll introduce a problem, an inter-character conflict, usually in a dialogue scene with overbearing music, and then they'll resolve it the same way later on. If there are multiples of these, as there usually are, problems and resolutions will be staggered throughout the episode. Though honestly, The Flash is worse with this than Supergirl is. I also want to draw a distinction because I'll be talking about how the plot gets meted out. I think there's a difference between this and Smallville, in terms of, like, I think Smallville was plot dense, as I think I mentioned in that review, and Supergirl tends to be a little bit more complicated in terms of plot. Complicated versus, like, complex. And speaking of which, this review is going to be similar to Smallville in that it'll be like season by season, but I will try to keep it shorter, which is going to be a little easier because there are fewer seasons, so there is that. Okay, so finally, season 1. We start with, I would not call it a Monster of the Week thing, but it is, because it is more of a through line, kind of streamlined than that. But there is action, and we tend to fight against are escaped alien criminals. And they're led by Supergirl's Mama Zor-El's twin, who's named Astra, and her partner named Non. So we get in this season, we get introduced to Alex, her sister, Jean, James, Jimmy Olsen, and Win, who's kind of the techie guy at Catco, who ends up being the tech guy. There's always got to be a tech guy for the superhero team. It's Cisco Ramon in The Flash, and Felicity Smoke in Arrow. There's always got to be one of those. And he is a little bit more aesthetically the Jimmy of this group, I will say that. We also have Maxwell Lord, which I totally forgot about when I came back to this. That's a fun character to introduce from the comics, though he doesn't really have any mind powers in this. He's just like a rich guy, honestly. And then ultimately we get this device called Myriad, which is sort of like a device that can be repurposed to affect a bunch of people at once across the world. And that's like the character of the ultimate conflict of this season. And Supergirl ends up hoping her way out of that. So that's good. There is a very nice mystique around Superman for many of these episodes, which makes for a great effect. Like, you'll get just handwritten notes from him, and I don't know, that worked really, really well. I'm very happy with how that got handled. Before they will bring him in literally in the first episode of the second season. So a couple of standout episodes. For the girl who has everything, that's the introduction of the Black Mercy. She gets put under the Black Mercy. So she gets to like live a life on Krypton. It ain't exactly the adaptation of Alan Moore's comic in Justice League Unlimited, but it gets the job done. So it's good. Falling, season 1, episode 16 is our appearance of Red Kryptonite in this. She's not, and they really go full bore with this, because she's not just selfish and or forthright, but really mean. Is really mean, cold, shallow, and cynical. It was not fun to watch, really. So that's season 1. Season 2, we are seeing more of native Earthlings versus extraterrestrials. Lillian Luthor is playing a Lionel Luthor sort of role of being like the kind of super bad Luthor, to kind of have Lena be a comparison to, though Lena is from the beginning much more of a inclined towards good person than Lex was in Smallville. They lead Project Cadmus together, which is different from my understanding of Cadmus. That's supposed to be Amanda Waller's business, but I'm not going to nitpick that. New love interest in this season, Mon-El from the planet Daxam, and this is whose mother is Terry Hatcher. Her name's Rhea. James Olsen becomes Guardian. Alex is seeing this woman named Maggie, and Jean is dealing with Magan, who is initially assumed to be a green Martian, but really a white Martian. And for those familiar with Martian history here, the white Martians nearly wiped out the green Martians in a Martian civil war much before. But Magan is like a reformed white Martian, and she's like fights for the green Martians. So I mentioned that the first episode had Superman, and we first see him as Clark from the back, and there's this low-key but kind of like light tension-filled hopeful music, like this restrained hopeful music, and he's stumbling over his words, saying, I remember he said like lickety-split, and then he's like, I understand, I know that no one says lickety-split, sorry, and it paints him as a man of his era. I love it all. That was a fantastic intro. I was like, yes. But so, and then he proceeds to be Superman. And as Superman in this show, yeah, let's talk about that. Again, an issue is that he's not super active. It's not Cavill. It's not Cavill level. But he still gets swept along by the story instead of taking charge. And he does put Kara on a pedestal. And he gets beaten by her for no reason other than to make her look good. And don't get me wrong, encouraging what he does, what he talks to her about, he encourages her and he points out her strengths. That is very Superman. But it would have been nice if he hadn't had to deprecate himself to do it. Yeah. Other standout episode, the appearance of Mxyzptlk. I do not recall his name, but I should have his picture up there. The episode is called Mr. and Mrs. Mxyzptlk, season 2, episode 13. And so at this point, between Mixie, Mon-El, and James, it does seem that we're falling into, because she's a girl, she needs to have a love interest trap. But that's mostly in retrospect, because while watching it, it never struck me as an issue, because it's centered around her, and she has agency around it, and it's far from the main thing she's about. And then the season finale, episode 22, nevertheless, she persisted. Line many people are familiar with. CW is all about cultural references. So this I don't see this as special. They make references to, CW makes Harry Potter, Game of Thrones references. So Superman is back in this. They kind of bookend him with this season. He becomes a mind-controlled obstacle for Supergirl. Whatever. That's actually not something that we've really seen, because he's always been the main guy. We haven't really seen it in any of these properties, but trust me, it's in other stuff, especially stuff centering Batman. And it gets really friggin' old. So I'm just like, all right. And then so there's a whole thing with like Mon-El and Kara and, fighting Daxamites and trying to find a way to beat them, which involves Myriad from the last season and help from Lena. And in the process, Kara just straight up kills Rhea, Terry Hatcher. Okay. I don't know, man. Okay, yeah. So season 3, that we have the Legion of Superheroes come from the future. Jean meets his dad, who's played by Carl Lumbly, whose voice I recognized instantly because it's Jean from Justice League and Justice League Unlimited. So that was amazing. There's this sort of Kryptonian world breaker personality called Rain who manifests in this regular human woman. And then there's this Rao worshipping cult. So that's season 3. Jean and his father, easily the best part of season 3. The father is going through dementia, and memories are such an important, like, he holds so many, not only his own. It's kind of like a Lois Lowry's The Giver thing. Like, he has a collective memory in him, and he's losing it. And so it's a father-son sense of loss thing, but also just a loss of culture that's threatening to happen. And he plays it really well, and it's hard to watch, but it's very good. There's not a lot else to love about this season. Rain is underwhelming, but not bad. The Legion is boring. So, standout episodes. Girl of Steel, the first episode. She starts out the season by, kind of doing a Clark from Smallville thing where she's stealing herself from her life as Kara and really throwing herself into Supergirl. Hence Girl of Steel. She's stealing herself from that part of her life because it hurts to have lost Mon-El. He's presumed dead. But then he returns with the Legion once they get uncovered from underground. So she's like, but he's spent like years and years away, and he's with a new woman. So it's all like, whoa, what's going on here? Midvale, season 3, episode 6. It's a flashback episode, it's Kara and Alex investigating the murder of a mutual friend, and they send files to Chloe for decryption. When I realized that they were doing that, I was like, this is crazy. Now listen, it's like, okay, this doesn't fit with Smallville stuff, it's not Tom Welling, it's Tyler Hoechlin. Why? What's going on? Like, okay, that really just goes to show how our standards for continuity have heightened. Like, this is something that we would have just seen as like, oh my god, it's a callback. We wouldn't have been like, well, this guy doesn't look like this other guy, and we're freaking spoiled by MCU and other things like that. It's just a cool thing. So, and then in that flashback, Jean is, he's been watching Kara for a long time, as a protection sort of thing, and he's disguised as an FBI agent played by Erica Durance, and the agent's name is Noel Neal. And you have to pay homage to Noel Neal as the first live-action Lois Lane in this fashion now, because by this point she has been about a decade gone. So you have to do it this way, unfortunately. Let's see. Episode 17, called Trinity, which is the beginning of the breakdown between Lena and Kara. With Lena manufactures kryptonite, and Kara is suspicious, and she but she realizes she can't just go full bore into it, so she ends up being duplicitous through James, who's getting involved with Lena, and she's like, okay, can you just, like, when you're over there, can you just find out if she has any now? And that kind of all comes to light. So it's really Lena and Supergirl, because Lena is not aware of the identity. Lena and Supergirl have the break first. And that's going to be important going along. Season 4. This is the alien rights storyline. With... Oh, God. I just got to get into it piece by piece, because this is the best. This is the best season. It not only has the most relevant storyline and the best plotting, because, like, I remember being so surprised that there is actually a regular progression to events. In other words, it's far less episodic. I remember being so surprised how, we are really staying on course from episode to episode. We're not, like, going off course and doing something else, and that was really refreshing to see. They are calm about it, about doing the alien stuff. They show the anti-alien hatred gradually, versus expecting us to simply accept it as gospel right away, which people who kind of have a reductive view of the CW and how they might view and depict oppression, they might say, oh yeah, they're just going to shove it down your... They do not shove it down your throats. They just are like, here it is. Here's what's happening to characters that we already know. But granted, as the season goes into its second half, and the villain ends up not being who we thought it was, it gets a bit messier. Like, they try to shoehorn Lex in. Okay. Because initially we have Ben Lockwood as the villain, and he is played by Sam Witwer, by the way, who was Doomsday Davis Bloom in Smallville. He is a fantastic character. It really shows the roots of radicalization in a clear-eyed and almost sympathetic way. So he was a pro-alien university professor, at odds with his family, but personal tragedies bit by bit slowly erode at his held beliefs until he turns into, like, the major figure of the anti-alien movement. It's, again, completely against the CW's reputation as being politically one-sided. They're clearly coming at it from sort of an expected viewpoint, like an anti-discrimination, anti-hatred viewpoint. But they're really trying to be even-handed about it, and I really do respect that. Yeah. At this point, I should mention Jesse Rath, who has been an actor since season 3. He was one of the Legion. He plays Brainiac 5, who is not an important character in the historical continuity. I think I've only mentioned him in terms of Smallville. And otherwise, he has only made an appearance in Justice League Unlimited and not one of these properties. But so he's not. I wouldn't mention him except that I really enjoy watching this actor. So I would recommend. I kind of want to check out what else he's done. Again, Jesse Rath. Though I should say, as soon as he came up, because he's Brainiac 5, and because of what happened in Justice League Unlimited, I expected him and Kara to end up together, and they never do. He ends up with a character that's introduced farther down the line. So, a couple of other things. I mentioned that Lex is in this, is introduced here, and he's played by John Cryer, who most people may know as the guy who acted opposite Charlie Sheen in 2.5 Men. And so that didn't affect me because I didn't really watch that show much. But despite my initial skepticism of him anyway, because he's shorter and he's bearded and he just doesn't, it's not Jesse Eisenberg, granted, but he still doesn't quite look the part. He has since become one of my favorite Lexes. He would be high on a ranking. There's something about his poutiness. Like, he's incredibly capable and everything, but still an insecure man-child. And I kind of do like that out of Lex. We actually get the Elite in this season as well, starting with Manchester Black, who is on form as pro-alien, so on the right side of things, but he does what Manchester gonna do what Manchester gonna do. And he starts torturing and killing and whatnot. I was unsure about him at first, but the actor really grew on me. And then later on, Menagerie and the Hat and maybe the dude who shoots suns out of his hands also makes an appearance. I'm not quite sure. There's also a great side plot in this season with Lena trying to level the playing field by making everyone super, because she has accidentally discovered how to make hearts supercharged and invulnerable. It's compassionate and a no-brainer, right? But the question is, to what will that ambition lead her? Another side plot. Alex has to get her memory wiped to protect Supergirl's identity, and it's really sad. Another side plot. Jean is attempting, in this era of fraught alien tensions, to be a man of peace, and he's frustrated with how ineffective that feels. And there's this amazing scene towards the end of the season where because his father at this point has sort of comic book died, he gets sunk into the earth as an attempt to stop something back in season 3, but it is a memory of his father, and it's either a projection or maybe his own mind. It's hard to say, but it leads him to realize that he was trying to be his father, but he's not his father. He's not. That's not who he is. He is the Martian Manhunter, and he says that in a great display of emotion, and it is very, very effective. So, standout episodes. Bunker Hill, episode 8, which is when Ben Lockwood, as Agent Liberty, he goes to jail. And I guess that's when he goes to jail, so technically the standoutness is a little bit later on when he's released because of backroom deals, corruption, and political pressure, and legal loopholes. Superman stories need this pushback against easy 40s and 50s answers, so I really appreciated that. The Elite, again, the Elite form in this season, and the episode is What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way, which, again, is the original comic title of Superman versus the Elite. Episode 15, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Which is the appearance of John Cryer as Lex Luthor, and also when Jean kills Manchester, which is what he had been fixing to do for many, many episodes up to that point. And then the finale, The Quest for Peace. Nah. LOL, Superman 4. Also, other than the plot wrapping up, it leads into the next season because Lex, as Lena is about to kill him, he tells her that Kara is Supergirl. And he does it. It happened. The effect is exactly what he wants. It twists her inside and sets her on the path that he's always wanted her to go down, the corruption that he's always wanted to put into her. And then the whole thing with this season is that the president, who's like a woman president, I'm with her, yay. That they kind of did that whole thing though. But she was always an alien, and she gets outed to the world, and so she resigns because she had not been honest about it, which is a bit hilarious. And then it turns out that the VP turned POTUS Baker, a guy named Baker, who was in on Lex's scheme, gets arrested at the end of the season, which is really hilarious. Yeah, so that was a really strong season. Now season 5, start with the good. This, like I was mentioning, this is when Lena truly retreats into darkness, and she's trusting no one. Her only friend is like an AI named Hope, if memory serves. So, like I mentioned with the heart and trying to make people super, she spent the last season trying to perfect people's bodies, and she'll spend this one trying to perfect their minds, right? Because she has just been hurt deeply by Kara, and she's trying to create a world where no one hurts anyone else ever again, which is, that always ends super, super well, so I'm so glad that's happening. And suffice it to say, Lex died at the end of season 4, but his death got interrupted by cosmic forces, which I'll get into in a second. And so he is somewhat present in this season. He's around to manipulate Lena's at least partially good intentions, but ultimately she does come around. Like she does rally to be her, independent, good-natured self. And there's some stuff with so that's the good stuff. The Catco which has gone through a bunch of different leadership. It was first Cat Grant, who's this very entertaining, great performance from seasons 1 and 2, and then James takes over, and now it's Andrea Rojas, who's like an old friend of Lena's. She's whatever. The main villain for this season is Leviathan, which is a series of really old aliens, one of which can is basically an earthbender. It's dumb. It's kind of dumb. It's not entertaining. But the one good thing that comes out of the new leadership at Catco is that we also get a character called William Day, who comes in from with his British accent, and he's just absolutely insufferable until we learn that he's faking it, and he's really undercover to check out Andrea. So that's cool. And then afterward, it becomes clear that he appears to be acting, at least for a time, as the true Lois Lane of the story. So he's he becomes a sort of love interest for Kara, who's, doesn't seem to have an expiration date on him as a love interest. So, there is a great Mixes Pitalik episode. Episode 13, It's a Super Life. He's an ally in this, and he takes Kara through a bunch of possibilities because she feels a lot of guilt over having not told Lena after all, and maybe she could have prevented her spiral. And he takes her through a bunch of possibilities, and they all go wrong in a different way. And it makes her realize that at the end of the day, Lena did make her own choices. So that was a good message. Now, in regards to cosmic stuff, because this is the Arrowverse, and because Supergirl is like the third show, so not quite at the beginning of the Arrowverse, every Supergirl season has had a crossover of some kind with the other shows. And I have not mentioned them because they are not Superman enough. But I have to mention this one, Crisis on Infinite Earths. I have to talk about it separately because there is so much Supermaning going on. So there's, they have the Monitor and the Anti-Monitor, and all of the worlds are getting destroyed, and different Earths are getting destroyed or collapsed into one. There are all these paragons that they have to gather in order to, stop it. There's a lot of that going on. So we're dealing with multiverse, so we get a number of alternate Supermen. So first we have Brandon Routh's Superman, who has been playing Ray Palmer on Arrow. But we get to see him in his element. And they do a great job at improving him for this. Over his shortcomings in Superman Returns. He is so much more self-assured. He is, a decade older by this point, but they give him some extra, salt and pepper over his ears, so that's helpful. And he feels more authentic. And I love because he gets mind controlled by Lex, who has this book of destiny, and he's trying to throw a wrench into things. And so he fights Tyler Hoechlin's Superman. And then after his head gets cleared, he says, "This isn't the first time I've gone nuts and fought myself." And I'm like, he's talking about Superman 3. He's talking about the junkyard fight. That's so cool. Because he is Christopher Reeve's Superman. Oh, that's so cool. I love it. Yeah. And then we have Tom Welling as making an adult cameo, which is very much the opposite of a Superman cameo in many ways, because he is just living on a farm with Erica Durance and a couple of Rugrats, and he doesn't even have powers. But it's still giddying, right? It's strangely appropriate as an homage to a series where he was all Clark, and he's still Clark. And it's against expectations, right? Because we're like, we want to see him in the suit and whatnot, but it's satisfying in its own way, honestly. So, yeah, that's what I wanted to say about Crisis. In terms of the rest of the show, it also allows the show to reset in the ways that it sees fit, in the ways that it wants to. Because, in the end, you have, when the smoke clears, it's all just one world, and, there are changes for, reasons. They can do whatever changes, right? They can kind of skip continuity in that way. So they are able to make Lex the owner of the DEO. There are these alternate Brainiac 5s. They resurrect that mutual friend that they had they had been investigating the murder of. So, yeah. Wow. Okay. Almost done here. Season 6. So Lex has continued to be a villain, and he imprisons Kara in the Phantom Zone, and a lot of the season is taken up by trying to rescue her from the Phantom Zone. And in the Phantom Zone is also Nyx Gispitlins, which, as you might expect, is a female fifth dimensional imp. So she is a peer of Mxyzptlk. And I actually really like her. It's not the first time I've referred to Doctor Who in this, but for any of those fans, she reminds me of the Master. Not aesthetically like the Mxyzptlk from Lois and Clark, I think. Reminded me of the old Master, but just in terms of like her happy, mischievous chaos. The only thing is, I wish her enmity with Supergirl was a tad more personal, because she tries to get her to escape after them thinking she's a friend. And they just kind of have this stare down where Nyxly's monologuing. And I thought that was really cool, but it never quite developed beyond that, even though she does become a major villain for the season. So yeah, and once she's there, we have a collect 7 stones type storyline. Are they Infinity Stones? Might as well be. Okay, but how does she get there? So it's weird because they rescue Supergirl from the Phantom Zone, and Nyxly holds on to the ship as they come back, but she somehow still gets trapped in the Dream Realm. Now, a character that I have not mentioned is Dreamer Weaver, who is the girlfriend of the actual love interest of Brainiac 5. And her dreams are her power, and whatever else telekinesis that they need for her to do, right? And so her thing is that the women in her family get this dream power, right? But she's trans, so she did not prepare, like her sister, who's cis, prepared for it and was able to prepare for it, and then she didn't. And then once she started getting the symptoms, her mom basically died right afterwards. So she has this insecurity with using her powers and not knowing as much as she would like to. So Nyxly meets her in the dream, and she says, I really want to, if you help me get out of here, I'll give you something in return. I'll bring your mom back for a day. And so she uses that vulnerability because she's so lost. And they try to do that setup, but Dreamer's so dumb. She's so dumb because she sees an omen of an owl that it'd be one thing if she did not know, right? But she does know. She knows, she recognizes, and the owl says, don't trust this bitch. And he's like, oh, and this is an owl means wisdom. And then once she goes through with the deal, inevitably, and her mom comes back, she says, why did you leave her out? Why didn't you listen to my owl? And she goes, that was your owl? Yeah, no shit, you knew that. It is infuriating, man. Yeah. And then Lena, turns out, has magic. No. Why? What? it's again with, she has like a witch background. Again with the witches, they never work. We had the silly one in Supergirl, in the Supergirl movie. We had Lana and the others be them in Smallville, and now this. It's not good. So, I can't even talk. What I think, so I think they just need magic to solve a bunch of problems, and they're like, hey, Lena, yeah, she's not doing anything. Let's give her the magic. Whatever. Yeah, she completed her arc last episode. She doesn't have anything to do. Yeah. So, what else? Standout episode. Season 6, episode 13, The Gauntlet. So I mentioned that that's like a collect 7 stones. It's like collect. They're really called totems, and they all are like, they control like human emotion, right? And so they want to collect these totems to gain power, particularly Nixley, right? So what happens is, when you get one of these totems, you have to run a test. And the one in this episode in particular is the Totem of Courage. And what you have to do is go back to a time when you lacked courage and then do it differently. For example, Nixley, she had some issues with her family in the 5th dimension, and she has to stand up to somebody, or either stand up to somebody or tell her brother how much he had betrayed her and how much it hurt. And she passes. She passes that. Because she and Kara split it, and so they can each try their hand at the gauntlet, but she succeeds. Kara's is from the first episode, when she catches the plane. I didn't even talk about that. She had not been Supergirl until the first episode, and then Alex is on a plane. She goes out in all black, and she catches the plane, and then she flies away. And then in this episode, I don't know whether this happened in the actual episode, but if not, they're retconning it. Anyway, when she's flying away, she hears a cry for help. And she didn't help that person the first time for fear of being seen. But this time, she does. She goes and throws the mugger that was mugging this guy, and then she's able to fly away, and it all worked out. She took the risk. She wasn't seen, and it worked out fine. And then the totem says, "You have failed." And we're going to come back to that. Alex and her new girlfriend, Kelly, who's James's sister, they adopt, bringing Alex's story to a close. That had been a whole thing. And with her old girlfriend, Maggie, who did not want kids, and they could not make that work, which is understandable. It works a lot better than the Lois and Clark ending, because there was so much that came before of there being of a struggle, and not of being like, oh, I might want kids, I might not want kids, we probably should have kids, right? It's the 90s. I kept saying that. It was just kind of assumed. It was never in the conversation. It was never a character conflict, an issue, and it definitely was here. Lex comes back for the end here. He comes back from the future. He'd fallen in love with Nixley, and he's just like, hey, you and I fall in love. Can we hurry that up, please, without any setup or work on my end? Which is kind of weird. But yeah, they start to work together. They start to gather these totems. They do not have the upper hand, so they start to play dirty. Lex ends up killing William Day, who has been really integrated into the group by this point, and it made me really sad. Like, he'd become this total sweetie who cooked with Alex's daughter. I was like, why would you crush my heart like this? But the good news is he at least anticipates it happening and records it. And that eventually allows Lex to be put away. So that's good. Yeah. So. All right, guys. I'm about to talk to you about the greatest episode in this whole run. I'm not talking about Supergirl. I'm talking about everything. Season 6, episode 20. Kara. So what happens? Lex and Nyxly, even though they're now opposed to one another, they both use the totems to basically rob humanity of everything they represent. The writers put in all the heroes they can to fight all the villains they can get. It's just a returning character palooza, right? And then all that works out. They get defeated. Kara does like a whole speech of like, you need to reclaim your humanity, reclaim your emotions. Very hopey. Everyone's story. Brainiac 5 had with Dreamer because he had thought that he was going to need to return to the future, but it turns out he's not. Jean and Magan get together. Alex and Kelly get married officially. Everyone is resolved, except Kara at first. She is, as a result, basically back in the same place that she was at the end of season 2, when Mon-El had just died, and he needs to return to the future permanently, and Brainiac doesn't. Funny how that works. But he has to go, and now William's dead. She doesn't have anyone who doesn't have their own thing going on, right? And that forces her to turn her focus to Kara, who this is the personality that she's been allowing to starve. And in that, she finds an unlikely hero, Cat Grant, the no-nonsense, kick your ass in a not quite in a Perry White way, but still in her own way, had been doing that first couple seasons, and we have not seen almost anything of her for a long time. And she comes back. She is planning on purchasing the Catco. She's buying it back, and she's no longer wants to be the editor-in-chief. She wants Kara to be the editor-in-chief. And Kara is planning on saying no. Because of all the complications with being Supergirl, and she actually might not even be at Catco at this point, because she's not able to reconcile everything, right? And so Cat knew, and we knew that she knew from the end of season 2, but Kara did not. That she knew that Kara was Supergirl. Kara did not know that. She finds out during a phone call that Cat has with her. And this phone call, and what immediately surrounds it, again, is in contention for the best moment in this entire enterprise. Cat convinces her that the secret is doing her too much harm, that it's preventing her from reaching the same self-actualization that she encourages everyone else, the same self-actualization that she had just made a speech about when fighting Lex and Nyxly, right? And I will say now, this is the moment where they played the Supergirl theme, which has been present throughout the entire series, but this is the moment where I was like, okay, this is above animated series. This is second. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, 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 boom. Anyway. So we have the phone call, and then there's the conversation with Lena, who is actually the only other person who's not, like, immediately involved with someone. Which is the other half of this. And here's where we learn something. We learn that with the Courage Gauntlet that I mentioned before, it wasn't a matter of taking the risk of being seen, of taking the risk, but of purposely, with no holds barred, allowing herself to be seen and dealing with the fallout and vulnerability of that. The fear was creating Supergirl as a separate entity in the first place. And obviously, what we've always heard is that Clark's or Kara's friends and family will get used and hurt, which is fair. We've seen it. But these characters, Kara and Clark, take it as a given that their happiness is worth sacrificing to keep everyone safe. The only one worth sacrificing. So Lena says she says that Kara, living by her own words, setting an example, is more important than living by fear, and that she does not hold the sole burden of ensuring everyone's safety. That she has so much support. There are all these friggin' aliens, right? There are all these other superheroes. And you can see this deflate Kara in the best way. She just breaks down, piercing the loneliness that always accompanies these Kryptonians, given their alien nature. Their L side, if you will. But yeah, this whole show has been about the togetherness of everyone. And there are so many aliens, so that doesn't really hold anymore. And as a bonus, this at least somewhat gives a resolution to the very idea of Luthor enmity. That's a big deal. She says, of all of my friends, you have pushed me the most. The togetherness is palpable, and again, it's with a Luthor. And then she takes off her glasses, slowly puts them on a table, and leaves them behind. Okay, I need to talk to people again. Okay, Superman fans. Okay, this identity thing is a tension that I think we don't truly realize we live with. Yes, there have been many times that he's revealed to Lois or Lana, and that can be a relief. And there have even been times that he's revealed to the world, but when he does, it's an Elseworlds thing that is something to go back and undo because it causes problems or whatever. It has never dared to be completely resolved for the sake of his, or in this case her, self-fulfillment until now. Smallville was about Clark becoming Superman. So, what ultimate resolution do you have here, given that she's already Supergirl? Well, make it about Kara and Supergirl becoming someone even greater. You can say what you want about the CW's acting and pacing, but god damn do they know how to end a show. That whole thing is S++. Similar to other CW stuff, it hurts my soul, but because there's some other like weaker stuff, I am gonna put it in A. But man, the love in my heart for this whole thing cannot be overstated.